everybody. Wow, it's so great to see you all, such a big crowd. I'm Shmuela Jacobs, and I'm going to talk to you about Angular 2 and understanding how it works and its components. So let's get started. A little bit about myself. So I'm a developer. Right now I do especially mainly front-end development at 500 Tech. It's a company where we have projects for other clients and consulting, and we also do courses, mainly in Angular and React. Like it says, I also have pets at home, a deaf dog and a one-eyed cat. I'm the organizer of ngGirls. So I just want to spend a minute or two talking about ngGirls, and then we'll dive into Angular. So ngGirls is meant to promote diversity in the development world, and I love Angular, so I do it with Angular. I try to promote diversity with Angular to teach women, but not only women, but mainly beginners, to dive into programming, to development, and show them how nice it is and not so hard, and how this whole world is really great, and there are lots of great and nice people who can help you. So we've had our very first ngGirls event. It was almost 2 weeks ago in Israel, in Tel Aviv. And it was a real success. We had 43 women who were beginners to development. They had a tutorial ready to build an Angular 2 app from scratch using the Angular CLI. And they were sitting in groups with mentors. So there were 13 mentors. And they were all sitting like that and coding the whole day long, and it was really beautiful to watch. We're thinking about doing other kinds of events, because doing an event which is for the whole day long, it was really nice, but it's difficult sometimes. So we're looking to do maybe some things after work or as our job, like to tutor someone who can come and sit with us wherever we work. We have lots of ideas. We have also interest in this project from other places in the world. Right now, we have interest from Berlin, Copenhagen, the United States, and even Brazil. And I really hope that we can also arrange some ngGirl events here in Milano and in Italy. So if you're interested in doing something like that, in collaborating with us, then just talk to me, right? Okay, so let's talk about Angular. I want to know a little bit about my crowd here, about you guys. How many of you have already worked or tried Angular 2? All right. What about Angular 1? All right. Yeah, so lots of Angular developers, Angular lovers, just like me. Yes, well, my personal story, just in shortly, I've been developing in other languages, C++, Python, Java, and it was all nice and good, but I always knew that I have to learn web development at one point in my life, because everything goes to the web. I can have a web application based in Python or Java, but still I need the front-end part of it, the JavaScript part. And I was trying to do things that I thought would be trivial, like validating a form in the client side and not in the server. And I tried to do that, and well, first there was jQuery, and it was like a mess. And then I got familiar with other frameworks, Ember, Backbone. It was okay, it was nice, but then I met Angular. It was Angular 1, and I fell in love. So that's what I do from that day on. And now that we have Angular 2, it's even much better. Okay, so what is it about Angular 2 that I love so much? First of all, it's not just a framework. It's already a platform. It's a platform that allows you to develop not only web applications, but anything, any mobile native applications, desktop, even Arduino and robots. And you take one code, you write it once, and you can just render it on whatever you want. Well, you need a renderer for that, but there are already renderers that you can use for mobile, for Arduino, and so on. So it really manages your whole application, and I think it's really great. It's cutting edge, of course, uses cutting edge technologies, always looking forward, always trying to be the best and the most forward and fast and performance ready for you, and everything like really new, really looking forward into the future, always trying the new technologies. And the Angular team has a philosophy that is composed of these three things that you see here: performance, productivity, and versatility. So they really think about the performance of the application that you're going to write, because it will be great for your users, and not only for the users on the web, on the browser. Of course, we all know how it's frustrating to wait for a page to load or for something to happen on the browser. But think about it, if it's on mobile, it's even more frustrating. If something takes too much time, then it means that there's a whole big process behind that maybe takes a lot of power from your device and uses the battery a lot. Or maybe if it has to transfer a lot of data, then your internet roaming is used, and that's also expensive. So the Angular team really thinks about performance. They think about productivity. That's for us, for the developers, that we can write something once and learn how to write it and then reuse the same code for different things. We don't really need to learn how to do different parts of the application in different ways. It's all the same. So it is really easy to learn, and we can concentrate on just developing our great application and not writing too much boilerplate and stuff like that. And versatility. Like I said, you write once and it applies to different platforms, to mobile, desktop, and so on. Okay, so we'll talk about the main things that we have in Angular 2. The language, first of all, that we're using TypeScript, the component architecture, component types, and the change detection that happens there. The ng module that was introduced right before the final version of Angular 2 was ready, and the dependency injection and rendering architecture. So let's start with the language, TypeScript. So TypeScript is developed by Microsoft. And generally it means just JavaScript with types. So we have the regular JavaScript, the regular old, the language that we're all using, that we've been using for 10 years or so, and it didn't develop much until there was a new standard, which is a superset of ES5. The new standard introduces classes and arrow functions and lots of things that we really, really love. So it's really great to use ES6 or ES 2015. If you're not using it yet, please start doing so. It's really, really great. You don't have to think a lot about scopings and all these weird stuff that happen with JavaScript. You have classes and you have a better variable definitions and lots of new stuff that you just really should use. So TypeScript is a superset of ES6. And so what TypeScript gives us, it gives types for our variables, which is great for type checking and type safety. So it helps us code our application. It helps us during our work and and prevents errors in runtime because we can catch them while we write our code. It helps with IntelliSense, and it gives us other things like decorators and more things. But let's see what we have in TypeScript that is specifically helpful in Angular 2 applications when we're developing. So everything in Angular 2 is classes. And TypeScript, along with ES6, gives us classes, JavaScript classes to use. Every class is decorated with decorators that are given to us by TypeScript. And we'll see the usage of decorators and what it is later on. And the dependency injection is much easier with TypeScript because we declare that we want some type of a service. So we just give it the service type, its class. And Angular can take this class and look for the instance of this service. So it's really, really great. So it helps us in developing. And also, all the tutorials that you find now in Angular 2 are all written in TypeScript. So really try using TypeScript, even if you don't really use type safety and don't dig into that, just try to use TypeScript as your basic application. Angular 2 is written in TypeScript, if I haven't mentioned that. Okay, so I'd like you to think a minute about it. Angular is developed by Google, and TypeScript is developed by Microsoft. And who would have thought there would be such a great collaboration between these two companies? There's so much love in the air that even they have written recommendations in the website. This is from the TypeScript website, a recommendation written by Brad Green, which is one of the head developers in the Angular core team. And these are such nice and warm words, and it makes me wonder if Google and Microsoft can do that. Maybe also, other species in the world can love one another like that. So these are my pets. All right, so let's talk about what's going on in Angular 2. The component architecture, which is, I think, the main idea in Angular, and it's also where other frameworks of web applications take us to. It's an architecture that we're going to use a lot now. Okay, so let's look at a basic application, which is a store, an online store, and it has different components. You can actually see the components. So if you click on one of the items, then the application switches the view to the view of the item itself. And let's take a look back. Okay, we can split this application to really different parts where we see some of them change and some of them don't, and each part has its own purpose. So we want to encapsulate these parts, these components, and make them be make them have their own abilities, have their own functionality, and be independent, as much independent of other components as we can. So this is the basic HTML, how this application would have looked like. It's really like pseudo HTML. So we can see that the structure of the HTML, of the template, already gives us the structure of components which can be siblings. For example, the header and the navigation bar in the side and the main view are sibling components, and they can be nested. So the main view has the search bar inside, nested inside, and the view of the products list. So these are children of the main view. And inside this view, we have the product component, which is duplicated according to the product list. So we actually can see here a form of a tree of components, right? So that's what we're trying to do. There are companies that, well, based on our experience in our projects, in our projects that we work with companies, sometimes they don't start writing the application, not even one single line of code, before they think thoroughly about the structure of the application, about this component structure. And it is really important, especially if you have a really, really big application that can do many things. It's really important to think about how things communicate, how components communicate with each other, how which components are nested in other components, which services you'd like to have in your application, and so on. So sometimes for a whole week they just draw the application tree on the whiteboard without even writing any line of code. Okay, so this is the application tree. Again, maybe it's not really the whole component tree. Maybe you would have done it better, but that's just for demonstrating right now. Okay, so let's look at what it is that we have inside one component. A component is composed mainly of these three parts: a template, its style, and the controller. Okay? The template in Angular 2 we write it in HTML notation, and it later on compiles to, well, it depends on the renderer, but if you use the browser renderer, then it is compiled to JavaScript code that adds the elements that are in the template that you've written, adds them directly into the DOM. Okay, so it is not even compiled into real HTML. That's for performance reasons. So here we have the element h1 with binding, which you all know and familiar of in Angular 1. So it's the same in Angular 2. If we have something on the controller, some variable in the controller, we can bind to this variable in the template and see the value. Okay, so here the value of name is Angular 2, and we bind hi with curly braces name, and we have style for the component. And here the style is giving the red color to h1 elements. Now, usually you'd like to encapsulate some style in the component, but be careful about it. Angular 2 gives you as a default full encapsulation of the style using a really nice mechanism where they change the components class names and attribute names and adds to it so that this style is valid only for this component. But you would like to be careful with using that too much, because we've had one case where there was a very, very big application with lots of components, and the developers used this style encapsulation in all the components, and the whole application looked really, really great, and the style was amazing. But then they said, okay, now we want to have a different theme to the application. It's kind of themed white. We want the user to be able to switch it to a dark theme. So now with the style encapsulated with each of the components, they had to go inside each one of them and change the style according to the theme. So be careful with that. You can still give a global theme to the application in a global style sheet, and it will be valid to all the components. So try to have the style that is more relevant to where the components are positioned, on, one related to the other, or the elements within the component, to have this encapsulated, but the general style, the colors, and maybe the font, and so on, to be in a global style sheet. Okay, so if we have this, what will be the result on the screen? Come on, you know it's easy. Okay, yeah. You'll see Hi Angular 2 in red. Okay, cool. So, what other things can we use in our components? First of all, we can use other components. And that's how we nest components one within the other. That's how we build the whole component tree. We can have directives. So most of you here are familiar with directives from Angular 1. So for those who aren't, I'll explain shortly. A directive is a piece of logic that you can put on any element, which can be a native element or a component element, a component that you've written by yourself. And it does something with this element. Okay? So actually, components are directives with templates. So directives are like components but without the template. It takes the template that it already has, it takes the element itself, and does something with it. We'll see a few types of directives later on. Okay, what else? We use services. We can use services and use them inside the controller of our components. So services are also JavaScript classes, and Angular takes them and we have to provide them to the application, and I'll show how to do that with ng modules. You provide the service to the application, so Angular takes over and creates an instance of this service, and then you can inject it to different components, and all the components that use it will get the same instance. So you can share information and functionality between different components without thinking too much about how to do this yourself, how to do the singleton, a singleton object, how to create it and manage it yourself. You don't have to think about it. Angular will do it for you. Okay? Of course, you can also use regular classes that are not singletons, not managed by Angular. Okay, another cool thing that I just want to mention here is pipes. Pipes are used to change the value of the bindings that we have. When Angular interpolates the expression that we pass in the binding, you can pass a pipe which will take the result and do something with it. So this pipe that I use here, uppercase, is pretty simple, and you can actually do the same with CSS. But there are more complex pipes that do things that you can't do with CSS. For example, JSON pipe or date format pipes. So what will be the result now? Okay, yeah, hi Angular in uppercase. Well, the hi is not in the expression, so the hi is still the same as it was. All right. So we'll see some code in this presentation, but I think to understand Angular 2, well, you have to see some code, but most of the presentation will be more about diagrams that will help you visualize what's happening inside the application. Okay, so we can see here the basic structure of a component. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with that. So like I said, in Angular 2, everything is a class. So here's the class hello component, right? And it has things inside. It doesn't have many things right now. It has one member called title, and we pass it a value, hello world. And we have a decorator for this class. So like I said, decorators come from TypeScript. They're actually, I hope, are going to be included in future JavaScript versions. But right now they're not. It's not in ES6. But decorators are really, really great and nice. Okay? So that's the decorator. And what it does, it's actually a function that you see that it is called here with one attribute, one parameter, which is this object of definitions that we pass to it. And a decorator actually takes whatever is written right after it. It takes it as one of the parameters, one of the arguments into the function, and does things with it. So the component decorator, as well as ngModule and other decorators that we have in Angular, they're used to add data to the classes that we write, so that Angular knows what this class is, what this class represents, and then it can be used the way we want it to be used. Okay? So this is the component decorator, and right now it has a selector which tells us how we would use this component throughout our application. So this is an example of usage, and it has a template which we recommend to use inline templates and not have the templates in a different file, because usually the templates should be really, really small. If you have a very big template for a component, then you should think about destructuring it, to breaking it down to smaller templates, maybe have another component tree made from this component, a subtree. So think about it if you have long templates. And once it is small enough, you can put it in the same file and look at it directly when you're looking at the controller. So, so it's much easier to manage. It's much easier to understand and to work with. Also, the controller should be really, really small. It should only control the view and not do elaborate stuff like getting data from the server, for example. You should use other classes and services for that. Okay, so let's move on. So there are basically 3 component types, but you can look at it in different ways. There are stateful components, stateless components, and routed components. So stateful components are also called container components or smart components. And what they do, they take data from the server, for example, and inject this data in. They take it from a service, and the data sits in the component. And then the component passes this data to other components and manages it. Okay? So it's not something that is really natural in Angular, but whenever you write your own application, you build it and think about the architecture, maybe you should think about these different types of components. Okay? So in this case, my store component gets data from the product service, and it can pass the product list down to the subcomponents. And that's, we really try to minimize the responsibility of each component. So that's what we do here. So if we have a stateful component, so we should have also a stateless component, which is also called presentational component or DOM component. Okay, well, that's the name that it was given to. So if we have the stateful component, it passes its data to its children, which are stateless component. They don't preserve the state of the application, but we use inputs and outputs to communicate, to pass data and to react to events. Okay, so in this case, for example, we have the my store holds all the products list, and it passes the list down to the product list component. It passes it down using input. And if there's any event, then it will be fired with output. And the data can pass on. Maybe the product list will take one of the products and pass it on to a product component. So let's see how it's like in the template. In my store template, my store, again, it's the stateful component. It calls the product list component and passes by input, which is with the square brackets, the product list. The product list is a property in the product list component, and it passes the products, which is the product list. And so product list can't show the products by itself. It doesn't communicate with the service, and it also is not responsible for the actions that you'd like to do on this data. Whenever the user wants to do something with one of the products, for example, to add it to the cart, then it fires an event back up, and the smart component is responsible for doing something with this product. Okay, so the DOM component delegates the action to the smart component. Okay, so again, this is the view of the component and how we pass the data in. So this is the DOM, the stateless component, and we use the input and output decorators. So it tells Angular that this component has these properties, the input properties, product list, where we can pass in data, and that it emits this event, add to cart, that the parent can catch and do something with it. Okay? All right. So properties and events don't exist only in the components that we write. Angular gives us the ability to use them in native HTML components and in any other component that you import from any other library, maybe some jQuery library or anything else. Angular gives you the ability to bind to properties and catch events in the same way. Okay, so for example, here is the button, and we catch the click event and do something with it. So the click handler is a function on the component and in the controller of the component that has this button inside in the template. Or this input. We can pass in the value that will be the initial value of the input. We can pass in style. we can catch the event of key up, and Angular also gives us the ability to catch specific key up or key down events. For example, when the user presses enter, or when the user presses the escape key, or anything else. Okay, so that's really, really nice to use. It's really cool. Okay, so what about properties that are also events? For example, we all know ngModel from Angular 1, which gives us the ability of two-way binding. We also have ngModel here. It's a part of the forms module that you can use. And it also gives us the ability of two-way binding, because we have the input passed from the controller and the output that is shown on the screen. So we just use the two types of brackets, the square brackets and the parentheses together. And the result will be two-way binding, just like we know in Angular 1. But the order of the brackets is important. So how will we remember this order, that to put the square ones first outside and then the circular ones, the parentheses? So in Angular, they thought about it a lot, and they came up with the image of a banana in a box. Okay. All right, so that's how you remember it. All right, so there's also routed component, like I said, which is also called view component. So when you click on one of the items, you route to a different view, and also the URL changes. So how do you do that? I'm not going to get a lot into this, but you declare the routing in a module, in a router module. So these are the two routes with the components that you route to. And you need to use the router module as a dependency in your application. And you use the router outlet in the component, which will switch the view that you want to go to. Okay, so change detection is really, really great in Angular 2. It uses zones, a new library that just takes over your application, all the components. It just adds its code, its abilities to JavaScript scopes that can be fired in different and called in different ways. So if you have an event, if you're waiting for something to happen, then Zones takes over it, and it knows that you put an event listener. And when the event fires, Zones tells Angular that there was an event and that it needs to run the change detection. It's really, really nice, and you can also use Zones for your own purposes. So I recommend you to read about it. It's really simple. And so read about it, and maybe you'll have more ideas how to use it. So the change detection, whenever anything asynchronous happens, Angular just runs from the top of the application tree to the bottom, and it looks for anything that changed, anything that you put on the template, any bindings, any expressions. And if it changed, it re-renders this specific part in the template. Okay, and you can also use it in a more in a better way, which doesn't go through the whole tree of your components. If you're using unpush strategy and you're using immutable objects, then Angular will know that only if an object really changed the whole the data that you passed as an input to a component, the reference to it really changed, then only then it will go through this component and look for changes. And so if you have a really big application, then it saves some of the it makes the performance a bit better because it doesn't go through the whole tree. Right. we've got about a minute left, so I'll just talk quickly about modules in Angular, which I said are true. So modules help you organize your application in blocks of functionality. And so, for example, in our application, first of all, the whole component tree will be in one module, in one root module. And we can take parts of the tree and have them in their own modules because they have their own functionality. Okay? And modules can use other modules. For example, the form modules that I mentioned and the routers module. And they can use services which are provided to the application through the module. Okay, so this will be another module. So quickly, what we have in modules, in Angular modules, we can have everything. We can have components, directives, pipes, services, and other modules, other Angular modules, which we import, and we declare which components and directives and pipes we use within the module, and we provide the services. When we provide a service, like I said, it is it creates one instance that you can use wherever you want in your application, not only in the components that belongs to this module, and you can export some of these things outside. So you can encapsulate some of the functionality within the module, and you can export it, you can expose it, and make it public to other modules to use. And if this is the root module, then you don't have anything to expose outside because it's the root, and you just have to declare what is the main component, the root component that you're using. All right, so, well, we talked about modules. I mentioned the dependency injection and how it works, so we'll just look quickly at this component tree again. The service which can be injected to different components once we provide it to one of the modules, even if it's not the root module. Right? But then the root module is enables us to use it within the whole application. And I talked about the rendering architecture, which enables you to write one type of code, one application, and just by changing the renderer to use it in different platforms, in mobile and Arduino and whatever you want. So whenever you bootstrap your application, you tell Angular which renderer to use. But what's really important to think about here is not to access the DOM from within your application that you're writing, not to access it directly through document element. Don't do that, because Angular does that, the renderer does that for you, and that's really crucial in Angular applications if you want them to be platform agnostic. So that's it. That's just a tip of why I like Angular 2 so much and what you can do with it. And I hope you enjoyed my lecture. If you'd like to ask me any questions, if you'd like to talk to me, you can communicate with these channels or come to me right after the talk. And I hope you enjoyed this talk and enjoy Angular 2. Thank you very much.